Welcome back to the podcast. Gabe Yanes and I, we are joined by Tom Szymanski, one of Gabe's longtime friends. This guy had an incredible story about basically how he's super fit, law enforcement officer, husband, father, the guy, and then just gets, an illness of a diagnosis of MS and his journey coming back, and Gabe qualifying for the adaptive division of the CrossFit Games. Dude, what a powerful story and incredible human being.
Yeah. And, we just finished off with this, which I think was a really interesting footnote. So the adaptive games are going to be in September, and that's actually going to be a year since he was discharged from the hospital. So this has all happened like very, very quickly. Like, we're recording this 9 months after his diagnosis. Well, not the diagnosis, but him ending up in the hospital. So like you said, it's a really eye-opening and inspirational story of a lot of things that we take for granted as protectors and providers, and how you deal with that, or how he dealt with that, and the inspiration behind that when some of that gets taken away completely outside your control. So amazing story. I love the guy. I'm super lucky to have him in my life. So appreciate that we had him on, and I'm sure people will take a lot away from this episode.
Yeah, in particular, listen to the end. Listen to the end when Tom talks about, essentially, if anybody's ever been to a CrossFit level 1, we talk about building a hedge against sickness by working towards fitness. And I think that, we talk about that in terms like, when you're 70, 80 years old, still being able to do stuff. And that's the way I normally look at it. But this is a really good example about how he built his hedge. Something happened to him, boom. And being fitter surely wasn't a disadvantage in this particular case. So we appreciate all of you guys listening. As usual, go back, check out our other episodes. Enjoy this episode, share it with a friend, and leave us a rating or review. If you've been a fan of the podcast for a long time, it really goes a long way when you leave us those ratings and reviews, improves the podcast, and also shares it with more people. Without any further ado, let's dive into a great episode with Tom.
All right. So welcome back to the podcast. I'm opening this one up because the guest today is a close friend of mine, friend for a long time now. So Tom is someone that I know from his brother, Chris, who I met at like the gym, and like anyone listening here knows that like some of the closest friends that you probably have are people that you like met with back in the good old CrossFit days. I mean, me and Chris went back and forth for a really long time, had a good thing going. Chris is in DC now, but really good friend of mine. And Tom, I met you when you started coming to the gym, visiting him. We got some good workouts together, became friends. And before we hit record, we recently been talking a lot more because Tom's daughter's a month apart from Shay. So we've really been connecting about, being new parents and what that is like. But I'll kind of give, I think a good place to start is I wanted to give kind of like how I like just found out about like, what you had going on. Cause I think it also like, it's a really good example of like how close you are with Chris. And I think that to me is just, I think a good part of this conversation too. Cause he was the one that messaged me and is like, hey, you guys have to have Tom on the podcast. And I'm glad he did, cause I'm really, really excited for this conversation. But Chris texted me and he was like, hey man, like my brother, like not sure what happened. He had like a pretty nasty stomach bug, and he's actually in the hospital right now. They're trying to figure out what's going on. He's pretty in the dumps. Like, I know he'd appreciate it if you shot him a FaceTime. And I really appreciate that, because one of the things that we've talked about on the show too is just how like calling and checking in on your friends is like a thing that we like. I know I don't do as much as I probably should. Like every now and then we definitely text people and we're like, hey man, how's it going? But like actually giving people a call, seeing how they're doing, FaceTiming, something that we can all do, is something I probably don't do enough. And I appreciate Chris reaching out and being like, hey man, like I think he'd really appreciate it. So I FaceTimed you right away. Yeah. You were very much in the hospital, and that's where you kind of gave me the lowdown of what was going on. But from that moment, and then I want to hand it off to you to kind of give us, what it is happened and how you got to this point now where you're going to be competing at the adaptive CrossFit Games in September. From that point, from that conversation, when things were so fresh and so new, I mean, I called you to quote unquote, like, cheer you up and kind of like, whatever, but you were so positive from the beginning. Like from the beginning, you were just like, I remember you were kind of like joking around when the nurse came in to like check in on you and stuff. And you've been so positive through what, as we get into the story, I think has been, objectively a very challenging time. And And I'm really curious, and what I want to dive into specifically is how that's helped you navigate the actual situation that you're in and balancing that with, being a new dad and kind of all the implications that it has.
Yeah, sure. So I appreciate it. And also appreciated that FaceTime, because like you said, I mean, seeing somebody on a screen, it's way better than texting. It's way better than calling. Obviously, we live states apart, so couldn't be there in the hospital room with me, but kind of as you alluded to, back in September 2023, came down with a pretty nasty stomach bug over Labor Day weekend, was in between the bedroom and the bathroom for all 3 days, sleeping a ton, eating soup and bread, and pretty much that was it. And then as I started to feel better, Tuesday, Wednesday came around, I said, let me hop on a stationary bike, do something kind of light. And I did, and for anybody who's been sick with a bug like that, it takes your body a little bit of time to adjust. So I felt a little bit sore and weaker than usual, but nothing really out of the ordinary. And then Friday came around and I said, it's been a week, I've been getting back into my eating and sleeping routine. Let me try a workout. So very simple workout. I tried to warm up some air squats, and that was the first thing that kind of felt a little bit off. Air squat, a basic functional movement, felt like I was going to fall over. And the sensation in my legs that I felt was kind of similar to if you ever hit your funny bone on your elbow, like just kind of a weakness and kind of a tingliness in my legs. But again, I had been sick for a while, not really eating, so I didn't think much of it. Then I moved over to warm up the bench press. And I put 135 on the bar, which, warm up weight, easy stuff. And it felt like 225. And I was struggling to crank out, 5, 6, 7 reps. And I thought again, okay, maybe it was a stomach bug. And I had just been eating bread and soup for a couple days. So I didn't think much of it. So I did the workout. It was running, squats, bench. And then I thought, okay, like that was a fine workout, but like I want a little bit more. So I did a thruster bar facing burpee workout. And again, trying to do a thruster with just the bar, I felt like I was going to tip over. And I noticed that as I extended overhead, my left arm was completely numb. And again, I thought, maybe I've been laying in bed too long, whatever, slept on it weird, something got pinched. So I did the workout. Progressed throughout the day. I kind of developed a little bit of a limp on my right side. And I didn't really attribute that to anything more than I had been in a local competition a couple weeks prior, came down off of a bar muscle up funny, kind of tweaked it. So I thought maybe this aggravated it. So I'm going throughout the day, and then I go to scratch my ear. I'll never forget this. I go to try to scratch my ear, and I can't bend my left fingers at all. And this is kind of when I start to realize, like, this is not just eating bread and soup and sleeping for 3 days. There's something more here. So finish work, go home, talk to my wife, and I just tell her what's going on. And I say, hey, like, I don't really know what's going on here. Like, I'm trying to stretch out my calf. I can't raise up on my toes on my right side, not because of pain or anything, but I just can't elevate. And that was also another thing, which was kind of like, this is weird. So she said, which, I think was the appropriate thing to say was, well, maybe you just overdid it. Like, we've all kind of overdid it coming back from an injury or a sickness. So I said, okay, sleep it off. Next morning, she went to work. And at that time, Sophia was 9 months old. So, Gabe, I don't remember what your routine with Shay was at that time, but our routine was I would give her a bottle. She was crawling around a lot at this time. And then I would do stretching routine kind of as she's crawling around playing. So I'm down stretching on my forearms, kind of in a half kneeling position. And, Saturday morning, I want to get up and get a cup of coffee, and I just can't get out of that position. Like, I literally lean forward to try to stand, and there's no flexion in my legs at all. I can't contract my muscles. I can't get up. I go nowhere. So my first thought was, well, let me try the other side. So I switch sides, and I can't get up from that position. And again, there's no pain, no weakness or anything, but my legs just won't turn on. So at this point, my literal first thought was, I'm about to die. Like, I'm going to die today. And my second thought was I'm so glad I did that competition a month ago with Chris and his fiance. And then the third thought was like, I got to go to a doctor.
Yeah. So your brain was telling your body to do something. Your body just wasn't corresponding to that action, right? Like you were saying, hey, get up, but it wasn't firing, connecting.
Correct.
And you thought you were going to die, huh? I mean, it's funny. It's not funny, Tom, but it's interesting is that because I've never experienced that, I could see how that would be one of the thoughts that goes through your mind is that I'm going to die because you're so used to telling yourself, hey, put your right foot in front of the left, and it just occurs, right? But then if it doesn't occur, you're like, oh shit, like what's happening? So, okay. Anyways.
Yeah. Gut reaction, gut reaction. There was no pain or whatever, but I thought like at this point, this is not normal. Like I should be able to stand up without thinking. So kind of fast forwarding, I text Chris to come watch my daughter. I told him, hey, I'm going to take myself to the doctor. Texted my wife, like downplaying it, obviously, just saying like I'm having trouble walking, can't really stand up. At this point, I can't use my left hand at all. Like to pick up the phone, if I try to pick up the phone, it just drops through my hand. So I'm using my right hand. Chris comes, I get in the car and I go to urgent care. Getting in the car was challenging in and of itself. I'm kind of limping at this point, really having to use my upper body to stabilize, go to the urgent care. They tell me I need to go to the emergency room. So I drive myself to the emergency room. And at this point,
how did you drive yourself if you couldn't get off the floor? Does it come like intermittently? So is there moments where you could actually connect to your brain?
So I think what it was kind of the angle of flexion in the legs. So when I was kind of in that deep squat position in the half lunge, I couldn't get up, but I pulled myself onto the couch. And then from the couch, I kind of pushed myself up to a standing position. And once I was upright, I was able to walk. So when I got into the car, I held onto the door and kind of held onto the seat and lowered myself down. And then getting out of that, I kind of opened the door, pulled myself up with the door as like a brace. And then once I was upright, I could walk. So drove myself. But then as I got out of the car at the ER, walking into the ER, my legs started buckling underneath me. And I was literally holding onto the side of the wall using my upper body to kind of support myself. Walk through the doors. The first thing they asked me is hey, are you on drugs? I told them no.
Tom, what are you thinking at this point though? Because so you went from like that gut check reaction, things aren't getting better. Like I'm just like imagining you walking through the parking lot of the hospital. Like what's going through your mind at this point? Is it just like tunnel vision? Like I just need to get to the doctor to figure it out? Or are you, there's so many implications of like, I'm a new dad now, like work, like what does this mean for whatever? Like, are those things crossing your mind at all at this point? Or are you just like, I need to figure out what's going on?
No, I would say after I was able to walk and that I didn't die imminently, I was like, okay. And it was a little bit more like curiosity, kind of like, what is going on right now? Because it's such a weird feeling. And I try to describe it to people. Like the leg thing is the best description of the hitting the funny bone. But like with my fingers trying to open something, like I was trying to open a package to feed my daughter, it felt like there was like oil on my fingers and I couldn't open the Ziploc package. And no matter how hard I squeezed as I tried to open it, my hands just would come off the package. So it was like, what's going on? It was more kind of laughing about like, this is a crazy experience. I have no clue what's going on right now.
Okay. Yeah. Sorry to interrupt, but all right, you're going into the ER.
Yeah, going to the ER, I tell them, hey, this is getting worse. Actually, it started yesterday. It's getting worse. So they check me into the ER. They do a whole bunch of tests, CAT scan, blood tests, urine tests, ultrasounds, MRIs, get a spinal tap. And then they basically diagnosed me with something else that it turned out not to be. They diagnosed me with something called Guillain-Barré syndrome, which I had never heard of, but if you ever take a flu vaccine, they ask like, have you ever had Guillain-Barré? Because you get similar symptoms to what I was experiencing. Spend the week in the hospital there. Gets worse over the next couple of days. I can't completely empty my bladder. The following day, I can't get out of bed at all on my own. Really have to use my upper body, and it's primarily my legs. Left side of my body, upper body, I wasn't able to raise my arm, but I could still kind of use my right hand to text or to answer calls from friends like you. After a week there of doing OT, PT, they transferred me to an intensive rehab facility where we worked on occupational therapy. So that's things like tying your shoes, opening packages with your hands, zipping things, and then PT, things like walking, running. And what I'll say is that when I got to the occupational therapy, the diagnostic test that they did for me is something called the 5-time sit to stand test. And what that is they want you to sit in a chair and without using your arms, so kind of crossing your arms across your chest, stand up and sit down as fast as you can in 5 times. And they told me that average people, healthy people, can do it in less than 15 seconds. I tried it. I couldn't get up at all without using my hands. So I'm trying to get up. I can't get out of the chair at all. Eventually the PT kind of gives me their arm and I'm pulling up on their arm. And it takes me 1 minute and 6 seconds to do the 5 sit to stands with assistance. So that was kind of the level that I went in at.
That's an interesting test, right? Like because when you think about sit to stand, I'm thinking all the way down to the floor and then come back up again. But that's unique that they use that as a case study. You know, we talk about the ability to maintain range of motion in a squat position. And that's I guess a great example of it. Like, why should you be squatting? So that you don't have to use your rest of your body to help you get up off of an object. And to have that be the test, that simply validates kind of some of the stuff that we're doing in the fitness space. But anyways, all right. So 1 minute and 6 seconds.
Yeah,
at this point, did you have a diagnosis though? Because I remember we were texting for a while where you were like bouncing around, getting second opinions, third opinions, and you kind of didn't really know, right?
Yeah. So at this point, when I'm still in the hospital, they're still acting under the assumption that it's Guillain-Barré. So they're still saying that it's Guillain-Barré. And then I do a week in the hospital. I make improvements. I think that, you know, I break the 1 minute mark for the sit to stand, and they discharge me with a cane and a chair to use in the shower so that I don't fall. And it was after I went for follow-up tests that they start to question the initial diagnosis.
What is Guillain-Barré? Just or what is that? Neuromuscular disease? Like
so basically it's something that and I'm not a doctor, so layman's interpretation of it is you have we got Dr. Gabe over here.
Yeah, Dr. Gabe could help us.
No.
You have your body responds to something like a stomach bug, right? And then it fights off the stomach bug, and the antibodies get confused and start attacking the myelin of your nerves. So the myelin of your nerves, if you think about kind of like an electrical cable, would be this rubber plastic cable. And then Guillain-Barré, what happens is your body just starts attacking that. And then the impulses from your central nervous system to your limbs can no longer kind of go from point A to point B as smoothly, and you get lower limb or outer extremity weakness. So that's essentially what it is. And that resolves for most people between like 6 months to 1.5 years.
And because I remember looking it up a little bit after you talked to me, but it's super rare, right?
Yeah, it's pretty rare.
Yeah, pretty rare, but does happen after some sort of infection is commonly how it happens, right?
Yeah, and you know, people were kind of joking with me about it because it's usually you eat undercooked chicken, and who doesn't love, you know, chicken? And everybody knows if you overcook it, it's not going to taste good. So I was thinking, like, did I undercook the chicken? Is this really what did me in? Turns out, you know, spoiler, it wasn't that. But yeah, that at that point we were still operating under the Guillain-Barré.
Okay. So what happens after you get discharged? So you're discharged now. You have a cane. I'm also interested in the evolution of like the mindset. Like clearly you're improving. Mm-hmm. So that's good.
Yeah.
You're discharged. You have your cane, you have your thing is there any part of you that is like, man, like, you know, cause the other thing that I think is important context here is you're like a super fit individual. Like anyone that's watching the video, it's like, you know, apparent, like you work out. Fitness has been a big part of your life for a long time. And one thing that we talk about a lot on the podcast here is like taking pride in being like a capable human being for your family, right? Like being able to provide and protect and being like that guy that is, you know, both literally and symbolically like the foundation of the family that everyone can lean on. What part of that maybe felt like, am I going to be able to do that now that you're having to use a cane and a chair in the shower so you don't fall down? Was any part of that like, you know, something you were thinking about at the time, or you're just like, this will pass, it's going to get better, it's getting better, so, you know, we'll be fine here in a little bit?
Yeah, so there are two things that I kind of want to address with that. So when I was in the rehab, they asked me, what are your goals? And I said, my goal is to be able to pick up my 9-month-old daughter and to be able to put on her clothes. You know, you guys have daughters too. All those little tiny buttons and everything else, the shoes and all that, like it's tricky. And I wasn't able to do that in the rehab facility. So I said, I want to work on that. So really when I got to rehab, all I was thinking about, I wasn't thinking about fitness competitions. I wasn't thinking about work. I was literally thinking about how am I going to pick up my daughter safely from the ground and put her in the crib? Or how am I going to get her dressed in the morning? Am I going to be able to hold her and walk down, the stoop of the front house without falling? So they basically gave me like a weighted baby doll, for lack of a better term, and had me do all sorts of practice, like picking her up from, crib height, and then putting her in a chair, and then taking her out of a chair, and then kneeling down to like pick up a toy while holding her. So that was the priority. Like that was when I was in the rehab and I realized like this can get better. I poured my entire self into that. And then the second thing that I wanted to touch on based on what you said in terms of like how we see ourselves, I'll never forget, and this is something that I can talk about also in the current time frame, but one of my last days at rehab, they had me where the hospital was. There was a Whole Foods across the street, and it was in downtown DC. And they said, okay, we're going to have you walk from your room to Whole Foods. No walker, cane will be there if you need it. Go. We'll see how long it takes. It's less than a block away, but I remember crossing the busy DC street. And at this point, I'm walking kind of, no disrespect to myself, but crazy. My arms are flailing. I'm hunching forward. I still look the same as I do now, which is, a fairly fit guy. And I just remember being looked at by people kind of double taking, like looking at me. And that was the first time that I ever kind of felt like self-conscious about it. And it kind of, for me, was surprising how much I cared about it, because end of the day, like, I don't know these people. I'm walking by them in the street, but it made me so aware of the person that I saw myself as, which is a provider, a father, a husband, capable, mentally and physically fit. Like people kind of doubting that or pushing this doubt that they have into their perspective of me. So that just kind of motivated me to think more about internal strength and kind of internal outlook, rather than worrying so much about like, what does the person walking across the crosswalk think about me walking?
What I think is really fascinating about what you just said is that when you're a very fit individual, and for work, you're in the fitness space as well?
No, I'm in law enforcement.
Oh, that's right. Yeah. Okay. So you're in law enforcement. Obviously, physical fitness plays a big role in that as well, right? But so much of your identity, some would say, is like, part of being super fit. Same with mine, right? Like it's a piece of who we are. And I take a lot of pride in being the guy who could provide experiences, do the thing, walk across the street, and just people would be like, oh, that guy looks fit, whatever. But what's interesting about your takeaway is that when that was taken away from you in some way, shape, or form, it wasn't like you were saying, dude, I got to get back to a 455 deadlift, or, you probably deadlift 600 pounds, but I don't need to get back to a 600-pound deadlift. I don't need to get back to a 2-minute Fran. I don't need to get back to the thing. You just like, bro, I just want to be able to pick up my daughter and not be worried walking down the stairs that I'm going to drop her. That's my priority. And I think it's a really powerful takeaway for anyone listening, that when you look at your fitness within the context of why you train, you're a great example of someone that is your why. Your why is so you can show up for your family. And this is just a clear example how it's been tested. And that was what your priority is. So you're validating a lot of the way I feel about things. And you're doing it in a way where, a lot of people don't have that life experience. So man, that's huge. And
what I'd say to that, Jason, is, what I've found is consequences create meaning. So what I mean by that is consequences, meaning me not being able to stand out of a chair 5 times in 15 seconds creates meaning. So that means for me, like the ability to do that becomes so much greater than it was before this happened. Yeah. So I think that is kind of a mantra that is stuck in my head. Consequences, hardships, those create the meanings and crystallize kind of like what matters in life.
I think that it also really hammers home, like, at what point are you getting diminishing returns on your training? Because if it's taken away, the things that matter are being able to get your daughter dressed, being able to get those buttons together. Like I love those examples, because I feel like, and we've all done this, and I think that as we mature, and becoming a parent has completely changed this mindset for me, it's so much more important to just stay injury-free, stay pain-free. And obviously, in many ways, what ended up happening to you was completely outside of your control. But I feel for a lot of people, injury prevention, stuff like that is inside their control. And it's like, at what point is adding another, 10 pounds on your back squat or your deadlift worth the potential risk of losing the ability to do the things that actually matter pain-free? And a lot of people, like, you'll never go through that thought exercise unless it's taken away from you. And I think that is a really, really good example that hopefully people can, take away from it. Because, if you weren't able to do the simple things, you would do anything just to have that. And all of a sudden, like, your PRs, times in the gym, like, that doesn't matter at all. You just want this thing over here that matters. So if you do have the ability to do that now, that's kind of how your training should revolve around those goals, not the other way around.
Yeah, 100%. And I think that when I was in the rehab facility, folks looked at me. I refused to wear the gown, but I was always shirtless. So sometimes they'd come in and they'd be like, "Where's the patient?" And I'd be like, "I'm the patient," ready to go with the shoes on, everything. Maybe doing a little flex for people coming by, but no. In all seriousness, they were like, "Okay, do you want to run? Do you want to lift again?" And really, it sounds cliche, but like, I didn't care about anything other than being able to pick my daughter up out of the crib. And I kind of want to continue the story briefly, if I may. So I get out and they do some initial or follow-up tests to see if I had Guillain-Barré. And those turn out inconsequential, meaning that they were all normal. And then the discussion of multiple sclerosis starts to come up. And multiple sclerosis is something that I had heard of it peripherally, never really knew too much about it. But I kind of blew off my doctor, like, okay, like, what do we do? He said, well, you need some more MRIs and we're going to do these more tests. And I kind of just shrugged it, and he leaned in and he's like, this could be a big deal. And I'm not one to kind of Dr. Google myself. So I don't think I kind of realized at that point. But when I left the office, I started Googling, and that was a horrible mistake. Because, started to read about all sorts of different things about multiple sclerosis. And what I've come to learn is that it affects people differently. But I want to bring it back to the family component too. That same day that I found out that I might have multiple sclerosis, I dropped my daughter for the first time. And that was kind of a big thing. But I actually realized I skipped over something that I wanted to mention too. So I get discharged. I'll get back to dropping the daughter, but I get discharged and I'm home, and I'm so excited that I'm in this environment that I recognize that I'm comfortable in. I want to help out my family. And I start getting after it like I would for a sports injury, which is to say, like, putting in a lot of work, like hitting the stationary bike hard, all the PT exercises, and I have falls. So I fall randomly multiple times as I'm trying to push myself. And I realize, like, a neurological condition is not an orthopedic condition. And, the thing that I skipped over that I really want to touch on and discuss with you guys is an incident that happened 3 days after I got back from the hospital. My wife had put my daughter to sleep. We had our in-laws here helping out. And I was walking by my daughter's bedroom, and the door was slightly open. So I tried to close it because we were still talking outside with the in-laws. And in closing it, she started to cry. So I go in there and I think, okay, great. I've done all this PT and I've done all this OT. Like, I'm good for this. I can trust myself. So I pick her up out of the crib, and we have kind of a sofa rocking chair in the nursery. And I sit down with her. I rock her to sleep. Everything feels good. She snuggles up against me. I'm feeling validated as a dad. And now she's asleep. And I go to get up and I can't get out of the chair. So I think, okay, like, we've been here in PT, like, we've practiced this. Like, I try to use my elbow to leverage myself up, can't get out of the chair. So I kind of scoot to the edge of the chair, and I really, with all my might, kind of lean forward, trying to stand up. And as I'm standing up, my knees just collapse underneath me, and I fall to the ground, holding my daughter. And I kind of fall sideways, so I'm kind of football holding her on the ground. And thankfully, she's still asleep. But now I'm thinking, like, how am I going to get up? How am I going to get her there? What am I doing, like, alone in the dark, on the ground, literally on my knees with my daughter? Like, this is not the way I envisioned being a dad. And I started to get all this doubt in my head about just, like, the global meaning of what it means to be a dad. So I kind of crawl over, like we practiced in PT, on my knees to the crib. And now I try to hold her with one arm and pull myself up, and I can't do it. I just can't do it at all. So I try laying her down. Now she's starting to stir and kind of get upset. And I try to get up to kind of a half kneeling position and then pick her up. And I tell you, I mean, like the hardest I've ever tried to stand up, this felt like, forget about a 600-pound like deadlift. This felt like a 600-pound squat. Like I was pulling myself. I felt like my bicep was going to rip off my arm. I managed to get myself up and get her in the crib, but I literally just stood there and thought, you know, like, what the fuck? Like, what just happened? And it's honestly, like, I feel comfortable talking about this with you guys, but it's taken me a long time to talk about this and not have tears come to my eyes. Because as a father, the last thing you think about is not being able to be there for your child in such a basic way as getting out of a chair and putting her to sleep.
How do you not let those moments, like that moment specifically, just like completely spiral you into like, woe is me, this is terrible, like whatever? Because I mean, from what I know and from where you are now, maybe that happened for like a very like small moment of time, right? But you've clearly progressed to the point that like now you're, you know, going to be at the adaptive games, and obviously we'll get there, but like you've managed to continue to progress regardless of all these curveballs that you've been thrown. How in that moment did you not let that feeling like literally just like put you into a spiral of like, how am I ever going to get out of this?
Yeah, you know, I think initially that night and the next day, I kind of feel like I was wrestling with that. And I would be lying to you if I said that like I didn't spiral a little bit. You know, like I literally fell with my daughter and I couldn't get up. But, you know, as I kind of thought about it and as I started to talk about it, I reminded myself like we always have a choice of how we're going to react to a situation. So I'm a firm believer that challenges kind of crystallize character. So if you're a positive person and you face challenges, you're probably going to become more positive. You know, likewise, if you're pessimistic, you're probably going to become more pessimistic if challenges come your way. So I've always been somebody who tries to do the best that I can to overcome obstacles. And I've said, like, rather than forgetting this moment and how horrible you feel, use this moment as motivation to work towards never allowing something like this to happen again. And obviously, I didn't choose to have the situation that I had, but I can work towards getting it better and know myself and know my limits as to, well, maybe I shouldn't be sitting in such soft a chair. You know, just bring another chair in there and making small adjustments just to say, like, don't forget what happened. Like, don't ever forget what happened, but use it as a motivator in pushing forward and being positive and realizing that, like, hey, I can get out of that chair now and put my daughter to sleep, no problem. Maybe I'll have a setback, but I've overcome that obstacle for the time being here.
So does it get better? I mean, you seem like you're doing better now. So, I mean, this whole thing has been over the span of like a couple of years, right? Because you said it was 2020.
9 months, actually. 9 months.
Sorry, not a couple of years. So 9 months. So, you know, you'd think if you're in that situation, it would be really difficult to put myself in your shoes, because I would want to do all the things, like you said, come home, think about, all right, what can I do? How do I do deep tissue work? How do I do the thing to get my body back to activity? But for you, it wasn't like that, because it's more of a neurological disease, right? So like, it's not so like physical. That'd be a very difficult shift that I would have to go through. So this occurs with your daughter. Obviously, that was like a major moment in your life. I could only imagine what that's like. I mean, especially for guys fit as you. And yet, what does that process look like to come out of that? I mean, you sound like you have a very positive mindset, but it's like, at the same time, it's not something that you could physically improve, or can you? Like, how has that journey been? Because it's almost like your body has to go through the evolution, or I just don't know enough about the disease to make. I'm just curious, like, what was your mindset? And then what did you learn about the disease, and how do you actually improve it? I'm curious about.
Sure. Yeah. So fast forwarding a month ago, early May 2024, I finally got diagnosed with multiple sclerosis. So this is something that I'm by no means an expert in, but you can make improvements. And the thing is that multiple sclerosis affects everybody differently. For Gabe, it could present one way. For you, it could present another way. For me, it could present a different way. And the reason for that is because essentially what multiple sclerosis is you have lesions that develop in your central nervous system. So think of a lesion kind of like a scab or a scar, and the central nervous system being brain, C-spine, T-spine, and kind of the lower spine, lumbar spine. So depending on where those things occur, it's going to affect you differently. And when I went to my doctor back in May, what he said is, hey, upper body, it's all back and it's all good. It's past baseline where it is. Lower body, you're not completely there yet. You're probably never going to recover entirely from the lower body because I have permanent spinal cord damage as a result of these lesions. So what does that mean for me? I can't balance on my toes on my right side. And I have very weak left side hip flexor. So if I'm sitting in this chair and raise the knee up, it's very easy to push that down. So in terms of how do you approach getting better, a lot of it comes down to the community component of it. And the biggest takeaway that I've had is being exposed to the adaptive CrossFit community, and that whole experience of finding out that there are neuroadaptive divisions has been such an important part of this process that I'm still going through that I'm super thankful for.
I want to ask about the lesions. And so and again, I'm very uneducated on this, and so I apologize in advance, but this occurred really out of kind of, for lack of a better term, out of nowhere. You get lesions on somewhere along your spine, and those lesions create a byproduct, which for you was pretty extreme in the beginning. But then how come some lesions get better and others don't? And then how does that even occur in the first place? Like why did they say that even happened?
Yeah. So, I mean, these are questions that I don't fully know the answer to, but in terms of the lesions themselves, it's an inflammatory disease. So think about inflammation being set off by something like maybe it was my stomach virus, and that just kind of pushed my immune system over the edge, that these lesions had been sitting dormant, and that was the push that they needed. And in doing so, they call kind of an MS attack a flare-up. And there are different things that can affect it. It can be an infection for some people, it can be heat, or it could also just be unprovoked entirely. So how do they arise and how do they occur? I don't entirely know the answer to that. They could be also on your optic nerve, and you could go temporarily blind. I have a lesion in my brain that affects right side balance. So it's very hard to also be balancing on my right leg. And throughout the process, asking some of these same questions, I've been lucky enough to connect with some other neuroadaptive folks with MS that have just kind of told me like, hey man, my experience is unique. There's some overlaps probably with yours, but it's going to have to be a trial and error for you.
I know that we're bouncing around a little bit, but I do want to go back to the other incident that happened with your daughter, and how that, continuing on the evolution of, hey, this is getting better, this isn't. So what happened there?
Yeah. So, chronologically, I fell with her out of the chair first. Then I find out I might have multiple sclerosis. And at that point, they had cleared me to drive. I wasn't able to drive for a while because of the leg weakness and not being able to kind of shift gears and everything. But I'm getting her into the car, and my foot kind of hits the side of our driveway, and she goes tumbling out of my arms and falls in this bush. And I can kind of like laugh about it now, but being told that I have a potentially chronic disease and seeing that, I'm not able to care for my daughter because I'm dropping her and she almost landed on the concrete, a huge setback. Just from like a mental health perspective of saying like, I was making all this great progress. And now they told me, hey, it's not Guillain-Barré, which resolves in, a year and a half at most for most people. It's something that's going to be chronic. So what does that mean? And it was hard because it's literally, peaks and valleys of you feel good one day and then something completely out of nowhere happens again with the family. And it just, I think for that one, I buried that one kind of deep for a while. I didn't even really want to tell too many people about that because I felt like it would be disappointing to other people to hear that, hey, Tom's made this great progress and now there's this setback. And I felt kind of self-conscious about it.
Man.
What role does that play, though? I think you're hitting on something where you're saying, "Hey, I want to talk about it," right? And which, by the way, I could completely understand why you wouldn't want to, maybe even to your wife, like show her that, hey, there is a setback. But what does that do, like with your? I know you're really close to your brother. Obviously, you're married. Like, how is that connection? We talk a little bit about, or not a little bit, a lot about this idea of like shoulder to shoulder. And I host weekly men's club workouts, and the friendships and bonds that are created there are really powerful. And just even be able to just share, like, just say like, hey man, this is what's going on. And not like they're not seeking a pity party or anything like that. Just sharing like, hey, this is what I have going on. I'm curious, what role has it played where you just like speak to your brother, speak to whoever else you can find, and whether it's Gabe or others, to share like how you're feeling and what you're going on? Because I imagine internalizing all that over time, it's difficult. So what role does that play? Like the connection with the different people in your community, and then how are you using that as a support system?
Yeah, so you guys had Adam Sassuto, if I'm saying his name right, on recently, and I think what he talked about was the 3 A's of kind of awareness, acceptance, and then action. And I think where I was when I had these experiences I just described, like I wasn't completely aware. Like I wasn't really aware of my limitations. I kept saying like I could vacuum, no problem. Well, I fell later in the day. I could get my daughter out of this chair, no problem. I dropped her or fell. And I wasn't completely aware. And it wasn't until I had kind of the one-on-ones with people, not where I was sharing, but where people were asking like, hey, Tom, like, honestly, like, how are you doing? That I started to be able to kind of open up a little bit. And I remember very specifically with one friend, we were talking and they said like, but for real, like, how are you? And I could feel myself wanting to say like, I'm having a hard time, which I think anybody would say that's completely valid, and like choking up because I hadn't actually ever verbalized that to anybody. I told them like, I would say like, I'm working through it. It's difficult, but I'm getting through it. But when that question was asked, and I allowed it to come up, I mean, it came up with a lot of tears. That was, like I hadn't actually, cried up until that point for many years. But it felt super good. So to answer your question, I think that having the awareness that somebody might not be completely aware of like the situation they're in, and kind of asking like, hey man, are you good? Like, I know this is difficult, but like really, like, how are you feeling? Whether it's on a phone call, in person, over a workout, that's allowed me to develop comfort within myself to say like, okay, like I know my limits. I kind of accept where I'm at, and I accept kind of this fraternity that I have with my brother and my friends, or this relationship I have with my wife, where I can now go myself to say, I'm having a tough day, or this happened and I want to talk about it. And it's been such a burden lifted from my shoulders to feel comfortable talking about those things. Cause like, I think there's a big stigma about like guys, especially fit looking guys that are accomplished, like crying or saying like, I'm having a hard time.
I wonder on the flip side, one thing that I'm thinking about is how do you balance, and I'm curious, Jason, your thoughts too. How do you balance as a friend that knows someone that, is clearly dealing with something? How do you balance like, because I think a big benefit is the person that kept digging and kept like, no, but really, like, how are you? How do you balance that with maybe they're not ready to talk about it, or maybe they are okay and you're just like putting it in their head that like, no, really though, like, how are you doing?
Or you don't feel like it's your place to be saying that, which is, you know what I mean?
Yeah. Cause I think that like, especially based on what you said, Tom, like you're very fortunate to have those people in your circle that like would dig deep enough past the initial, like, oh, like, it's been tough, but I'm getting through it, like the superficial, to like really try and get it out of you. I'm wondering what, would be something that, people can think about when they know that they could serve the flip side of that equation and be the one to like really pry that stuff out of them. I don't know. How do you think that you balance that, or read the room to know how much to dig?
I think it's about sharing vulnerabilities, right? And, I have a specific example of like a work colleague that I'm not super close with. I don't really know that well. And then when I found out that I had MS, he had heard about it and reached out to me, and he told me like, hey, my dad had MS and it was really hard because of these reasons growing up. Like, if you ever want to talk, or, I'm here for you, whatever you need. That really made me feel like a lot more comfortable talking with him about it. And it doesn't always have to be like somebody experiences MS for the first time and you have a dad who has MS. I think even just saying like something along the lines of, hey man, I know that this happened or you're going through this. It's not the same, but I've experienced, feelings of depression or anxiety, or I've had loss or I've had grief. And I just want to let you know that I'm here for that. That kind of, I think, sharing your own experience brings down the kind of protective wall that I think guys have up sometimes to be able to say like, yeah, we could talk about this because you know what I'm going through in some kind of capacity.
Yeah. And I think it also goes back to something that we've talked about on the podcast before, but like you also just never know what people have going on. And I think that in many cases, like everyone's dealing with something, and, obviously there's varying levels of what that is. But I think that especially when a lot of what you see of people, whether they're your close friends or not, because we don't see each other in person as much, is stuff that they're posting on social media and stuff that's going out there, which is always just the positive, right? It's always just like, super guilty of this. Like the only thing we post is like, like smiling babies and having so much fun. Dude, there's a whole other side of it that never makes it, that is super, super tough, and moments where you feel like, am I doing the right thing? You feel like you're not being a good husband, all those things. I think that just being aware that everyone has something going on also gives you that level of empathy that it is worth always asking and always checking in, because we all have shit. Everyone does.
Man.
But I want to get to where we are now.
Yeah, me too.
Dude, I want to hear like, all right, so maybe a good place to start that part of the conversation is what even gave you the thought of like, hey, is there like a division for this? Like, who do I talk to? Who do I reach out to? Like the impetus to like want to compete again. How did you get to that point? And then I'd love to hear how we got to the point of seeing you in San Antonio here in a few months.
Okay. Yeah, no problem. So I'm going to kind of segue, last thought on what you said before. Hot take that I have is that sometimes being too optimistic gets in the way of achieving goals. And I credit my wife for kind of bringing this to my awareness of me saying like, I'm able to do this. I'm able to, take care of the baby, push her in the stroller up a hill to daycare. And she's like, can you really do this? I was like, sure. And then realized that if I have that as my goal, because I'm so optimistic, it's actually going to be detrimental to me being able to do that down the line. So this kind of segues into how I got into knowing about the adaptive vision. I started talking to friends about like, I want to work out, but I don't know if it's okay with this condition that I might have. So I have a buddy who I know from DC who actually works out in Pittsburgh with a guy by the name of Brett Horcher. And Brett has been in the adaptive community for several years. He has MS. He's won the games a couple of times. He finished first in the semifinals. This time around, he's not going to be there this year for personal reasons, but they connected, or my friend connected me and Brett. And I talked with Brett and I said, hey man, like, tell me your story. Very similar story to mine. And he was like, yeah, like you might have MS. I didn't have the diagnosis at this point, but like you can still work out. Like it's not going to hurt anything. You might not be able to walk for a couple hours, or you might have your symptoms getting worse, but you could still do it. And he told me in addition, like, hey, there's this thing called wheel WOD. They do things for adaptive athletes. And I said, yeah, I've heard of the wheelchairs or folks missing limbs. And he said, no, but they do stuff for people with neurological conditions. So I started to look into that. And I remember after talking with Brett, I went and I did like a workout. So I did like flutter kicks, push-ups, and like hang power cleans with 10-pound weights. And I was crying in the middle of it. Like, no lie, I was crying in the middle of it, just so happy that I could do this thing that I love to do. And it was okay. So Brett told me about wheel WOD. I went on their website, and there's a whole classification process. So I needed to submit a whole bunch of my medical paperwork showing, the tests that have been done, the sit to stand. My grip strength was reduced. They wanted to see metrics for that. And then after that process, I had a Zoom call with Kevin Ogar, who's running wheel WOD, and a couple other folks who were kind of like physical therapists. And they asked me about the symptoms that I had. asked me about some of my experiences. And then after that, they told me, hey, there are these 3 divisions for neurological impairments, neurological minor, moderate, and major. It kind of seems like you're in between minor and moderate. Can you send us a couple of videos of you doing different movements? So sent them those videos, and then they gave me a classification of neurominor, meaning that I have a neurological condition that inhibits my ability to perform certain specific types of work. And, kind of from there, did the open and met a lot of cool guys. Actually, I got a shout out. I actually have a group thread. We're called the Slightly Neuro Squad with Ben Fallon and Adam Nelzik. Those 2 guys have MS. Ben is over in Ireland. Adam is in Illinois. And those 2 guys, honestly, they've become like super close friends. They've been dealing with MS for a while. Adam won the open, Ben won semis. So like we just kind of joke about stuff, and they also kind of can get real with it too, and say like, yeah, this is what I went through. This is how I dealt with it. So it's been super great to kind of find that. And more exciting, I would even say, than like qualifying for the games is building that friendship. Like, they're texting me all the time, and we're actually going to be, doing a Zoom call this week. So I kind of went all over the place there, but that's kind of in a nutshell how I heard about the adaptive neurological category.
All right, we're taking a quick break from the podcast to talk about what we have coming up on the Train Hard app in the month of July. So we're halfway through the year, which means that all the programs on the Train Hard app are entering a new training phase for the months of July, August, and September. So if you've been waiting, if you've been thinking about joining the Train Hard app, now is a great time to do it, because we're turning the page on the first half of the year and going into brand new focuses. Force is going to be focused on building some raw strength in the back squat, the deadlift, and the bench press. We're also going to be working on developing some strength in some body weight movements, the pull up, the dip. So just a lot of really great structured strength work, as well as the conditioning to make sure that you keep that engine going strong. So a lot of strength focus and force. So if you're trying to get strong this summer, absolutely something to check out. And then on the flex side, we have a brand new training phase as well. And that first 6-week cycle as part of that training phase is going to have a big focus on these giant sets. So 5 exercises per muscle group that you'll do in quick succession. So you'll do something like a bench press, then you'll go dumbbell bench press, then you'll go incline dumbbell bench press, then you'll do dips, and then you'll do push-ups back to back to back. The pump on these sessions is unreal. And I promise you, if you're trying to build muscle, if you've struggled to put on a little bit of weight, this is going to be the way to do it. This is going to be the way to improve your body composition. I'm super excited. And then the last thing is we now also have past cycles of Flex available as an ebook. So if you're just not trying to download another app, you don't want to be on a monthly subscription, you can now access Flex specifically by going on the Train Hard shop and purchasing the ebooks for either just a 6-week cycle or the full first training phase of the year. So highly recommend checking that out. Highly recommend getting on the Train Hard app. Let's get strong. Let's get big. Now let's go back to the podcast.
I like that, Kevin. I didn't realize that the depths, because I've watched Tom Miazga. Do you know Tom? He is one for the adaptive athletes at the games last year. I helped commentate for some of it, and so I was able to experience it. And it was obviously inspiring and fascinating. But there was a lot of different categories, and so it was a little bit difficult for me because you'd see some people compete against other people, and it was a little bit like they just had different. It was just different, right? It wasn't something I was used to, because I was used to typically the open division, and I didn't realize that they went to the depths they do. I mean, even to go as far as like a call to discuss and evaluate where your position, to try and make it as fair as possible while also making it constructive, right? Like each person is on different levels. I didn't realize that. So thanks for sharing that. I did have a question though. It seems to me like the outlet you have now, I mean, here it is 9 months later. It's not like it's been that long. You went from a guy, for lack of a better term, super fit, able to do whatever, to basically not being able to. It seems like your perspective as of today, has it really shifted? Because I think in my life, I've had some experiences where your perspective shifts and you just become a lot more grateful for what you have. would you say that's like the biggest takeaway is like, because you know what it feels like to not be able to lift up your daughter, now that you can, I imagine today, like every time you do it, it's like the greatest thing ever. I just feel like sometimes in life, hardships have a way of like leveling out our perspective and really opening our mind and making us more grateful. Is that kind of how this has been over the last 9 months for you as well?
100%, without a doubt, 100%. I think about my family and particularly, my daughter specifically. My wife and I, we choose each other every day. We wake up and agree to be married, and we love each other deeply. But my daughter, like anybody's child, didn't choose her dad. And for me, what I think about is the kind of dad that I want to be. And whether it's getting up from a chair, going on a hike or whatever, like I want to be there. So I'm so grateful for every single moment that I have with her. And something that I was doing before this happened, but I've really picked up doing much more, is writing a journal specifically to her, that, in the event that I'm not around or that, things happen, she can kind of know what this experience was like for me while I was going through it, and not have it in like an email inbox somewhere or whatever, but a tangible journal that she can kind of look at dad's handwriting, think about, what dad was thinking about on this day when this happened. Because I could talk about things that happened in the past with her when she's older, but having her kind of relive it in the moment has been super helpful for me, and kind of a further expression of that gratitude, putting pen to paper.
This stuff has obviously impacted you, but it also impacts, sometimes more so, the people around you that like care for you and love you, and just, don't want to see you going through the hardships that this has been, even though, your mindset's been awesome and positive. How has that been with, your wife and Chris specifically, their kind of experience around it?
Yeah. I think, well, Chris is doing my programming for the games.
Oh, I'm sure he's so fired up.
So we'll see, what the results of that are, but he is super understanding. And I think it's just allowed us to deepen our relationship more. I'm the older brother. So there's always kind of been like an older brother dynamic, but in many ways he's kind of stepped up to the plate and kind of, comforted me or encouraged me in a comforting way. Like, hey man, like you can do this. I'm programming this in this way for you so that not only you get better, but you realize your capabilities and your abilities, and on top of that, not just being grateful to be able to pick my daughter up, but to like hang out with my brother and not have a cane or whatever, like I feel like it's been hard for him, I think, to see, but it's also given us an outlet where we can kind of coalesce around this and do something very cool together. Because, it was you and Chris going to Granite Games and me cooking you guys, not undercooked chicken, but like fully cooked chicken for all your meals, and letting like you got to go to event 3 at this time and whatever. And now the roles have kind of changed a little bit, and it's just developed our relationship a little bit further.
That's awesome, man. Yeah. What you two have is super special. And I've always really admired, seeing you guys as siblings. So, that's been super cool. Yeah. And I can't wait, because Chris is coming out to San Antonio as well, right?
He is. Yeah, he is.
Oh man. The fact that this all falls in like my backyard is super, super fun. I can't wait.
Oh yeah, I know. Texas is so great. I get it. Everything's in Texas. The CrossFit Games are in Texas. Adapt is in Texas. Yeah, I know. Like the Jiu-Jitsu capital world's in Texas. But I think, Tom, I feel like we could have a whole nother show on this particular subject, but it's like, one of the things I've been reflecting on a lot lately is my wife and I, we met really young at 15, and we've been together ever since. And something I've been thinking about a lot, and you talk about writing. One of the things I've been thinking about doing is writing, I guess, for lack of a better term, a book that I would want to give my son before he goes into high school. And one of the topics on there I wanted to be like is to, find your queen, or find your significant other, or find whoever that is, someone that you could really do life with, and like that's always got your back, that's in your corner, that's ready to rock. And because life is going to get hard, and we all know that. And so I am curious, like the relationship you have with your wife, if you guys have done anything through this journey that has kind of helped you guys, because, adversity has a way of either bringing people together or push them apart. I wonder if you guys have done anything specifically to help.
I think that we have more intentional discussions about things. My wife and I think about things very differently. she's very much kind of planning it out, seeing how things go, kind of option A, B, and C. And me, I'm like, let's just jump into it and get after it and figure it out, like while we're in the middle of the water, so to speak. But we've sat down and talked a lot more about like, hey, how are you feeling about this? And how are you feeling about this? But not just that, because, that is one aspect of it. But we've also tried to make more of an effort to go on like dates together also. She has a very busy schedule. But, we get a babysitter, we go out and just have things that are like normal times, or like we have a beach vacation coming up. We both love going to the beach. And I think spending time and kind of committing to doing those things that brought you together in the first place and like revisiting them, especially after you have kids, like sometimes it's hard to do. Like we used to go out to eat all the time and now it's a big ordeal. So, I think it's sitting down and just being open with your spouse, and then also saying like, hey, remember when we did that thing that one time? You want to do something similar again? And just kind of taking the initiative to kind of relight that spark.
Yeah, it's interesting. When my daughter was first diagnosed with leukemia years ago, one of the nurses gave us recommendation. What she said was, "Hey, don't forget your date nights." And at the time, I was kind of like, it almost felt like she was kind of putting a negative omen. Like she hadn't been diagnosed yet. It was just like we were in the ER and whatever. But it turns out like that advice was very timely and very accurate. Right? It was this idea that like, hey, you need to keep those date nights. You need to be intentional in your conversation, especially when overcoming something like this that has this, this adversity. So yeah, it sounds like you and I are on the same path when it came to that. And that's still something that we do till this day, is keep those nights, which has been really, really helpful for us.
Yeah. And I think in that it's intentionally choosing your partner, like every day and every moment that you have, it doesn't even have to be like a big date night, but like I think I've thought about ways in which I could be a better husband. I'm not always necessarily like free with the praise when it's due. I'm not saying just like praise that you did a little kind of thing, but like saying meaningful praises or leaving little notes or just, telling my wife that, she looks really good, because, that's important in the relationship too. So just being more intentional about thinking about how can I better be a husband, and remind her that, yes, I'm choosing her every single day, and being okay with talking about, that emotional side of things. Even though, I work in law enforcement and, arresting people and doing all that other stuff. Like, I'd be a tough guy too, but like I could also be a sensitive and sweet guy.
Dude, 100%.
Sorry, I got kicked out there for a second.
It was all the Texas talk.
Yeah, dude.
That's what it was. That's what
that's what happens when you live on a ranch in Seguin, Texas.
Tom, and one last question I had is, how's this impacted work at all? How's that been?
So, it's initially when I wasn't able to kind of have all my grip strength there, or struggled kind of with the kneeling and everything. I was on like limited duties. The last thing I would want to do is be in a situation where I'm not able to secure my firearm when I need it. But I had open conversations kind of with my supervisors about it, and also my colleagues, and just said like, hey guys, like I can be an assessment of who I am, in this role, but like you also need to tell me, are you comfortable like doing a search warrant, hitting a house, and like having me be in the stack, or like I could support on the perimeter too. And having those conversations, thankfully, like my colleagues have been understanding. I don't have any limitations now. I think people have seen through like the work ethic, and this goes back to actions speak louder than words. Like I tell folks what I'm working on, and then I show them how I'm working on it, and I try to step up to the plate as best I can to put those words into action. So right now, no work limitations.
Love it, man. Love it. Dude, I love the mindset. I love just hearing it, even though I've been familiar with some of the story a little bit, man. It's super inspirational. And I appreciate you coming on and sharing it, because it's easy to take for granted the ability that we have as parents to do all those little things. And I think that how you've dealt with and the realizations that you've made when that stuff gets taken away completely outside of your control, right? One thing that we talk about a lot here is the reason you should train is because you should never, because you're so out of shape, not be able to do the things that you're not able to do. That's not the reason that you can't do them. You can't do them because you got unfortunately dealt a difficult hand. I don't want to say shitty hand, a difficult hand. So I appreciate you sharing it, man. I love that we got you on, and I can't wait to see you crush it in San Antonio in September.
Hell yeah,
man. I appreciate it. One thing I'll say is, I will push back, Gabe. It's not that I can't do the things. It's that I got to do them a little bit differently. And I figured out how to do them by making mistakes in the process and falling down, or, not being able to button the buttons. So it's really, like you said, kind of all about the mindset. And the last thing that I'll say is that I've never before felt so happy, grateful, enthusiastic that I did CrossFit. Because you go to the L1 and they're like, this is functional movement. Like, grandpa wants to be able to pick up grocery bags. Well, I'm not grandpa, I'm mid-30s, and I was able to kind of make the recovery that I was able to make because of all those hours in the gym, because of all the squats that I had done, because of the mobility work that I had done. And as a young, healthy guy, I took that for granted. And again, it wasn't until I was hit with this thing that I came out of left field that I said, well, thanks so much to CrossFit community and to, my own motivation to kind of put in the work and train hard so that I'm able to button my daughter's, dress, and I'm able to tie my own shoes, and I'm able to get the groceries, and walk downstairs without falling. So, shout out to fitness and training hard.
Yeah, Tom, I think that's a great way to summarize this conversation maybe not to summarize it, but another pillar is that you never know when life's going to throw you a curveball, and there's certain things that are in your control, out of your control. But one thing that's in your control is training hard, getting after it. And I guarantee you, no matter what comes your way in life, being in better shape is not going to be a detriment, right? It doesn't matter what happens. Name the thing. Being in better shape is not going to be a detriment to what's going on, because I assume your recovery was better, your mindset was better, all the things were better because you started off up here. So yeah, maybe during the process you might have gone down here, but imagine if you had started off down here, you could be on, I don't know, you could be a diabetic by the time you go through the full process, right? So I think that the goal is build the hedge now, train hard now, and prepare yourself to be as resilient as possible for the future.
100%. When we talk about building that hedge, it's almost abstract because you're trying to build a hedge for this thing that's supposed to come, 40, 50 years in advance. But to your point, and, Tom, to your story, it doesn't have to take that long. There are things that can happen that you need the hedge for literally tomorrow. And there's no way of knowing if that's going to be the case. And I hope it's not the case for anyone. But if it is, that hedge is now. It's not something that I need that for when I'm 70, 80, whatever. So, but yeah, man, I appreciate you coming on. I love this.
Yeah. Thanks so much for having me, guys. I really appreciate sharing and talking with you guys.
Hell yeah. Well, as per usual, we appreciate all you guys for listening to the podcast. I'm sure there's some takeaways from Tom's episode. Share with a friend, leave us a rating, leave us a review for the episode. It definitely helps us out. It helps out the podcast, but most importantly, it helps out your friends. If you got value from Tom's story, other people will as well. And most importantly, keep training hard.